Welcome everyone to this episode of the PwC Tech Talks. Episode 2 today on spatial computing, the final storytelling medium. Or is it? This will be up to you and us to decide over the next 30 minutes or so, while Alex and I go through this incredibly wonderful and magical topic. But to introduce us, let's go through both of our introductions. Alex, to you first.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Alex Ruhl. I head up the Metaverse tech team in the UK. And my absolute passion is storytelling, especially the convergence of storytelling and technology. So today, you forgive me if this goes on for an hour, because I could literally talk about this forever. My background is as a filmmaker. I've been creating virtual reality storytelling assets and experiences for the last, 8 years now. So yeah, lots to say on the matter. What about you, Jeremy?
So I'm Alex's counterpart in PwC US, and I've been equally fascinated by storytelling, not necessarily from a formal perspective. I don't have a creative background, but through building up PwC's first virtual reality, augmented reality team, I've come to appreciate the creativity, business nature, as well as the technological side of spatial computing, virtual reality, XR, immersive, whatever you want to call it, and how all those elements come together to create a really fascinating medium technology experience. I think it's quite all-encompassing, and we're certainly going to go through the very different facets of it in this talk. But whoever's joining us on LinkedIn, please tell us where you're from. You can put a comment on, and we'll be able to see your comments. If you are interested in adding to the conversation, help us steer the direction of where this is going, please do add your comments in. We can highlight them on this stream, and we can have a chat about where everybody's coming from, what your thoughts are, and looking forward to a great discussion. But what we'll do in the first few minutes, let's have a little bit of a chat around the news, what the latest is in immersive tech. And while everyone's telling us where you're from, thank you, Hakan from Boston, Oleg from Italy, Alyssa, Los Angeles. So we've got a few from Los Angeles. Noni, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Dace from Seattle, Iolanda from Lisbon, Laura, Brazil. Wow, we've actually got quite a decent showing today.
Exciting times. Thanks all for joining us.
Absolutely, yeah. Now, keep the comments coming, everyone. Really appreciate it. London, of course, as well. Alex, good to see you on board. So to run you through a little bit of what's happening in the immersive space over the last week, we've had quite a few interesting stories from the likes of Apple, Meta, Roblox, and even the Venice Immersive, which is part of the Venice Film Festival. But to kick us off, perhaps, Alex, do you want to tell us about the Roblox latest news?
Yeah, let me pull this up actually, because I think this is really interesting, right? When we're talking about metaverse platforms, immersive platforms, I personally am fascinated about, these 3D worlds that are kind of almost becoming their own mini metaverses, right? So Roblox, Fortnite, Minecraft, these platforms that maybe started as games that are now actually far more than that. These are, places where kind of people come together to socialize. These are places where people can earn money and transact with each other, even like live, concerts like we see in these big platforms. But the news this week from Roblox is that they reported 65.5 million daily active users, which I thought was huge. And they're actually going one step further. They're looking at how they can expand out how users can kind of user generate content and then sell that content. Again, kind of keeping you on the platforms, right, giving you a reason to kind of stay. And part of that, I think, is really exciting, because I think people are going to be able to flex creativity and create these little revenue streams just purely from being a user of a platform, which I thought was really interesting.
And that's in contrast to what we're seeing on Horizon Worlds, the metaverse platform from Meta. Now, current user counts are estimated to be around 900 daily active users in contrast. The interesting thing here is this may be as a result of a number of challenges they're facing, including it being a virtual reality specific platform, or at least VR first, versus Roblox, which has been desktop first until only recently. And also, I'd say it's probably the reason why Meta has just announced that Horizon World is going mobile. So in other words, they've released an Android version of Horizon World that is currently in closed beta. But that will hopefully help to boost those user numbers up.
Exciting times. What else have we seen in the news this week, Jeremy?
So I think there are some other interesting areas. We've seen of course, the big news story is the Quest 3. There's been some leaked information about it, some pictures posted, some speculation about the potential release date, some thinking October 10th, some thinking a week later, because some key games are going to release in that period of time. And there are a few other stories as well involving BMW, for example, offering a mixed reality experience. Ray-Ban, that is looking to allow for first-person live streaming from their glasses, which should be quite interesting. And talking about metaverse environments, we probably can't exclude VR chat. And the Android version of it has been estimated to be downloaded by about 10,000 people so far. And VR chat, I think, actually, speaking of storytelling, we should probably, this is going to be a complete digression, but let's remember this for the main subject. VR chat has been the subject of many different stories and communities coming together, and is a great example of virtual reality storytelling, community building. I think it's been interesting, a lot of the activities that are happening on that platform.
Which is, I believe, I could be speaking out of turn here, but I'm pretty sure a great segue into the fact that this week, the Venice Immersive Selection will be premiering at Venice Film Festival. For those of you who don't know, this is basically the biggest stage in which we see immersive storytelling come to life. It's the most gorgeous exhibition on an island in Venice. I was very fortunate to have premiered a piece of my work there last year. So congrats to all the filmmakers and the experience creators that are premiering this week. But we're seeing some really interesting IP and some new experiences premiere there, including Wallace and Gromit, and the kind of VR experience that has been built out by, I believe, a few different kind of production companies working together with the Wallace and Gromit IP. We've got Jim Henson's The Storyteller, The Seven Ravens premiering, some really interesting new IP. And also, this is the thing that I love most about something like Venice, is that it encompasses not just VR work, not just AR work, not even just, you know, virtual worlds live, but also things like, for example, last year when I was there, I saw the documentary, you know, the traditional documentary, We Met in Virtual Reality, which I believe since went on to kind of get distributed by HBO, which is a documentary. If you've not seen it, you've got to go check it out. It was created solely in a virtual reality platform. So really interesting to see. And I feel like, you know, that's the perfect springboard into today's topic, which is, with all of this advancement in technology, these new ways of telling stories, is spatial computing going to be the final storytelling medium? What do you think, Jeremy?
Well, you know what I think? I think it's not about spatial computing, but it's about the add-ons to spatial computing. So in other words, we've been dealing with stories from a multisensory perspective for many years now. We've had books which you read with your eyes, and you've got pictures popping up in your head. We've had movies, which has made the translation easier from a visual and an audio perspective. We haven't done a lot of or as much work on the other senses as we would have liked. So I think sense of touch, sense of smell, sense of taste. And we had some good comments on LinkedIn, actually, from Nick, who was talking about Nick Gooch, and he was explaining that he sees the spatial computing being the final storytelling medium if we can involve all those other senses. And I would agree. I think it makes absolute sense, no pun intended, that we incorporate all of these different elements to bring together the ultimate storytelling medium. But what if we take it one step further? And this technically is not I suppose it's not a fully recognized official sense, but if we can convert what we're thinking to pictures, to be able to translate that to someone else, that storytelling, that sense of communication, which is a key element of storytelling, at least in some aspects in the business world and often in the consumer world too, that those brain-computer interfaces, I think, could be really key to making spatial computing the final storytelling medium.
See, that's really interesting. And it really reminds me of one of the first TED Talks that I watched on the subject of immersive storytelling, which was by Chris Milk. And I can't remember exactly what it's called. We'll have to dig it out actually, like, so that we can point people that way. But in that TED talk, Chris Milk does, around the fact that if we take it back to caveman era, right, or like that very early human kind of experience, we didn't have any technology, right? So we would have to kind of like signal stories in order to kind of like pass on messages, right? About, like, for example, maybe not only what you were doing that day, but also what to be aware of, you know, telling people about upcoming danger and things like that. It was all to do with verbal or even, like, you know, more primitive than that, maybe even just kind of like body language to communicate like very early stage stories. Then you move on and, you know, you've got all of this kind of evidence around like paintings in caves, right, to kind of like then tell stories, like see stories. And then as language developed, then we had like tell stories. You could actually verbally tell someone a story. Then we got theater. Now, how do you like kind of actually bring to life these stories in like a much more kind of, I guess, dynamic, exciting way, seeing a story play out? Then you've got radio, where you can actually hear story. Then you've got film, where you see story and you're kind of more immersed with, like, you know, spatial sound and all that kind of good stuff. We're taking these really drastic, you know, steps to be able to tell stories in this more encompassing way. And so I feel like he talks in that TED talk about, you know, you put on a headset and all of a sudden you no longer, and to your point, Jeremy, you no longer have to tell someone a story. You no longer have to like show someone a story. You can actually just let them experience a story. And that's where you get that kind of magic, right? And I think that's something I've been kind of trying to explore for years now in kind of the work that I've been creating, especially in a business context, is how do you translate a story into a first-hand experience? So when someone takes the headset off, they feel as if it's encoded in their memory that actually just happened, right? It wasn't something they watched, it's something they experienced. But I think,
have you heard the term story living? That was quite popular a few years ago. I don't know if it's being used these days, but I thought that was a very good, succinct way of using a single word to describe what you're saying.
Yes, Jessica Brillhart, who was the lead VR filmmaker for Google, I think, came up with that term. I'm pretty sure that's where I heard that term originally. Yeah, she very much talked about even like thinking about the language of storytelling and how, you know, with film, you edit between shots. With kind of like story, you edit between chapters. But with story living, the idea is that you're actually jumping between worlds. And that is the way that you transport people around the story. So even the way that we kind of like create stories in this medium is slightly different to any other medium.
And I think what's interesting is we often think about storytelling from a consumer perspective. So we think about going to the cinema, we think about reading a book, watching a movie, playing a video game. But we often forget about how much storytelling is involved in the business world. So think about it. When you're in your workplace every day, doesn't matter what industry you're in, how big the company is, what your functional role is in the team, you're constantly being involved in conversations, in meetings, some better than others. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. But whatever it is, we are always involved in these meetings and we are trying to achieve certain purposes. If you're speaking at that meeting, you're trying to transmit information. You may want to try and convince, you know, stakeholders about different business cases. So there's an element of persuasion there. So there are lots of reasons why you might employ storytelling tactics in a business sense, and that goes across industries, that goes across geographies, and it's not often thought about. And I think I want to raise that because you and I, Alex, have been involved in virtual reality for a long time now, and we've used it from a business perspective, especially in the last few years, to try and tell stories. And maybe actually this is a good opportunity to introduce people to an application we both worked on called In My Shoes, which was probably one of our best examples of storytelling. So do you want to give a little intro to that, and I'll play the video trailer for everyone?
Sure. So this was a piece created in 2020. So you can imagine the fun of making a I think it was a volumetric interactive experience for a standalone headset at the time during a pandemic. Really good fun. But essentially the crux of it is, how do you bring the conversation around diversity and inclusion to life, right? Like, diversity and inclusion is such a subject that you need to really feel connected to the subject, right? It's not something where, yes, you can read stats, but is that actually going to catalyze action? And so essentially PwC wanted to create an experience where you actually embody someone who is going through their day-to-day life and experiencing those kind of microaggressions, or those kind of, you know, those really nuanced situations that actually wouldn't really make a lot of they wouldn't be as impactful, let's say, if you watched them on a video or if you just read about them. Actually stepping into the shoes of a character and feeling someone's body language change towards you, you know, seeing the kind of like the being passed over in a meeting, you know, because you're kind of seen as maybe slightly inferior in the room. All these really nuanced situations we could bring to life in a really visceral way. And this project has now been rolled out to well over 60% of our workforce here in the UK, as well as globally. And it's now helping kind of even our clients to catalyze conversation and create change when it comes to building inclusive workforces and environments. So really, really amazing project to work on.
Do great.
It's not rocket science. I think I did a solid job answering.
You look just like someone who works in security.
Wow, 6 months here and you're already climbing the ladder.
It's still a tough world out there, Sam.
Fantastic. Yeah. So thank you for watching that, everyone. We couldn't have done that without the help of our multicultural business network, whose stories helped to build that narrative, who provided the review and input to ensure that those stories were authentic in the workplace, and ultimately were able to work with us to create such a powerful virtual reality experience. And as Alex was mentioning, that type of experience couldn't have been, we couldn't have had those visceral reactions. We had to add a trigger warning to the beginning of that VR experience when we were showcasing it, because what we found is people were really emotionally impacted by it, which is both a good and a bad thing at the end of the day, but ultimately shows the power of the experience and the power of the technology. And we do have a desktop version of that, and that works when we're trying to, because not everyone can use virtual reality, so it's an accessibility feature as well as a backup feature. As well as for people who just don't want to use the VR headset for whatever reason, we have that as an option. But the VR experience we found, both through anecdotal data as well as subjective studies, proves to be a much more powerful medium or technology to be able to give you that sense of immersion, that sense of emotional impact, which is what we're looking for to generate greater empathy with that experience.
Yeah, and I just want to show Nolly de la Peña's comment here. Nolly de la Peña, if you don't know, is like one of the original immersive storytellers, and has been in this industry probably longer than any of us in terms of doing this. So I love this idea of the embodied edit. And that perfectly summarizes exactly what I feel like we kind of achieve within My Shoes. And to your point, Jeremy, that is the thing that, you know, it's not just, you know, people think about VR potentially as this kind of novel tech. It's, you know, sometimes being used as a gimmick, but actually in this scenario, the tech actually melts away. People are no longer particularly thinking about the fact they're in VR because they get lost in this embodied story. And that is what achieves the impact. And, you know, the script writing and the authenticity of the stories is what makes that, because you could, you know, have a VR creation where you just come face to face with an avatar and they tell you about their experience. That, you know, that's one way of telling that story. But actually putting someone in the shoes of someone, taking them throughout different situations, building that tension, you know, cinematically and kind of from a storytelling point of view, all leads to a bigger impact. And I think, you know, you made this point earlier, Jeremy, I don't think organizations embrace creativity as much as they could do when it comes to exploring new tech. I think it absolutely falls between, you know, the people that are excited about tech for tech's sake and the people that, you know, are trying to have an impact on a human level. And they don't see how those two things can be the same. You know, you can use this exciting new tech in order to move the needle with human experience. And that for me is what's so exciting about, organizations like Apple and Meta and HTC, like really kind of elevating the hardware side of things, making it smaller, more comfortable, higher resolution. So actually it allows the tech to melt away even more, just like good sound, right? If storytelling is done well, the tech should disappear. And that's what we aim to do.
And sound, actually, now that you mention it, we talked about visual, like sight and sound being key sort of senses for storytelling so far. I think sound doesn't get the recognition that it probably deserves. And I think a really good example of this actually was when someone showed a scene from a horror movie, and with that tingling, ringing in the background, it was actually quite a scary scene. But when they added a more, how would I describe it, a more humorous ditty in the background, it suddenly became quite an amusing scene. So sound, I thought that was a great way of giving you a sense of how sound is incredibly important to tell the type of story and elicit the type of emotions that you're trying to evoke.
Yeah, totally.
We've got here a question from Ryan on the experience, the In My Shoes experience we just showed. He's asking, are the characters and actors real life volumetric captures? And for anyone else who has any questions, by the way, feel free to write them down, and we can see them coming in and we can try and answer them. But Ryan, to answer your question, yes, absolutely. The reason those characters look photorealistic is because they were effectively captured directly from the real world in full 3 dimensions. So if you were in virtual reality in that experience, you could actually walk around them and see them from behind, from different angles. That was a really critical part of the storytelling element of that VR experience, because we were trying to get across the emotions that come from minuscule facial expressions, things that would be really difficult to animate manually, and sometimes you wouldn't even notice them. You know, the raise of an eyebrow slightly, the curve of a lip, the flaring of the nostrils. Those are small elements, but when they all come together, they do help communicate feeling and emotion. And we really wanted to capture those small elements because at the end of the day, that experience was about transmitting microaggressions and making you feel like you're on the receiving end of those negative emotions. So to be able to do that, we felt like volumetric capture would have been the truest technology, or the technology that would give us the truest connection to those individuals in virtual reality.
And it's interesting, right? Because we can talk about stuff like that, right, which definitely had an impact in something like In My Shoes, the final outcome, the final experience. You know, it'd be fascinating even to recreate that, you know, word for word, script wise, you know, exactly the same environments and music, but have CGI characters, for example, and see if there was, because that then would be a true reflection of how much is all of those kind of like combination of like visuals versus how much is the actual storytelling, acting, script work. Because there was a comment earlier, I've lost it, but they were asking
Nathan, isn't it, about how long it took to make?
This is exactly where I was going. Yeah, exactly. Like, which part took the longest? By far, the scripting and the storytelling. We went through rounds and rounds of feedback on which scenarios to include, how we would pull them together in a coherent kind of narrative that would leave you feeling like frustrated and angry and kind of, you know, really understanding of the complex topic that we were kind of discussing in that piece. And actually, once the script is in place, once, you know, the story is kind of outlined and we've got that narrative curve, then it's a case of slotting in the tech around it and building it. And don't get me wrong, the tech obviously also took quite a while, especially in the pandemic, but definitely like the narrative comes first for sure.
So I'm trying to put some numbers to this, Alex. Like this was, we built In My Shoes about 3 years ago, maybe now. And the script writing, it took about 8 months from this is an idea, we want to go ahead with it, to here's an application on a virtual reality headset ready to put on. And in those 8 months, I believe, probably 4 months, maybe 3 or 4 months was on script writing, maybe a little bit more even.
Yeah, I would say so, probably.
Yeah, so basically half of our time was actually just putting words on paper. It involved no more technology than a document on the screen and a lot of typing. And then there were a lot of back and forths around that. So that, I think that really illustrates to anyone who is creating some sort of a story of any sort, you know. I think everyone from the film, movie, creative background will understand this. But for those who are more on the business side that are thinking about using technology, using creativity for storytelling, you know, what Alex and I are saying, absolutely incredibly important. Getting that script right is fundamental, is key. If you don't get it right, don't even bother with the technology. Forget about it. The whole thing is dead in the water. That is why we spent half of our time, or even the majority of our time, not on the technology, but on just the words that would be in that script, that narrative, to achieve the effects we needed.
And it's interesting, right? Because I'm reading all these comments, like kind of very much, you know, concurring with what we're saying, like some talking about that flow, you know, Nathan here saying goals, then content, then tech choices, then creative, and kind of exploring that. But what's interesting to me is we've talked a lot about how much sound can add, how much visuals can add, like the difference between, you know, photorealism, you know, other options. But where I want to take this conversation next is kind of like, and obviously you can jump in with Alex's comment here, but is the fact that let's not forget that all of us, every single one of us, has been able to have a daydream that felt as immersive as probably anything we've done in VR. And that was purely just your brain fabricating a story, right? I mean, you know, I will be the first one to put my hand up and say, when I listen, you know, arguably when I kind of like listen to music, or if I'm just driving, sometimes like my brain goes into like really kind of creative places. Even when you're dreaming, right? That is the ultimate kind of immersive storytelling medium, because your brain is just kind of creating these very visceral 3D immersive experiences. So even just like without all of that input, it's amazing how your brain can actually connect those dots. Like I remember someone doing an experiment around like closing your eyes and listening to just like audio of someone talking, and how you can, you know, kind of almost hallucinate the what that person would look like, and kind of fill in the blanks of what the environment might look like. Or even like reading a story, right? Reading a book. How many times have you read a book and got fully immersed and can fully imagine everything, and then you watch the film adaptation like, that is so not how I imagine that person, you know, would look, or like how that scene would play out, that kind of thing. So it just shows you that actually your brain itself is almost like a storytelling kind of device in its own right.
Yeah, and we've only got a few minutes left, so I will answer 1 or 2 more questions, whoever has them. We've got one from Nicholas here, who's interested in how we're monetizing In My Shoes. Are we facilitating showings, then having discussions, workshops, any wider distribution? So In My Shoes is a privately owned product. So PwC owns the IP, and we showcase it in specific projects in different parts of the world. And in fact, what we've done a few things with it, Alex. So we've shown it outright, so with no modifications. With some clients, what we've done is we have modified some scenes so that it's more relevant to that particular client or that particular industry. And in some cases, I can give you a real example here. In Australia, the challenges that are faced there from an ethnic minority perspective are very different from the challenges we face in many parts of the Western world. So that required a complete script rewrite. And at that point, it was kind of a completely separate experience, but inspired by the work that we did in My Shoes and the results that we got from that. So it doesn't have any wider distribution. It's not available publicly. But if you ask nicely, maybe Alex will show you a demo in the London office. I'm based in Austin, Texas at the moment, but traveling all over the place. Thanks for the question, Nicholas.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just looking through some of these later comments as well, talking about storytelling content is effective for kids' education, is what Abdullah has said here. And I totally agree with that. In fact, I remember one of the very early kind of times I was thinking about the potential of VR as a kind of a transportative medium was thinking about the fact that a lot of my knowledge of history comes from the fact that my dad is this very charismatic storyteller himself, and he would tell me stories about ancient Rome and ancient Greek gods and things like that. And I was very lucky to have a parent that was so, knowledgeable and excitable and could bring to life some of these stories. But I was thinking about how exciting will it be, for example, for my nephews who are, 5 and 3, when they're older, they might actually be able to put on a headset as part of their kind of, normal education and be transported and get their history lesson direct from, Caesar himself, or, go and kind of be amongst the Greek gods as we kind of learn about some of that, that kind of ancient mythology that we learn about at that kind of younger age. The potential is awesome.
Immersive history, fantastic consumer use case of spatial computing technology. On the business side of things, we've talked about inclusion and diversity as a key use case for storytelling and spatial computing. That is also part of a wider training banner under which, of course, there are many use cases of the technology. We can use it for remote collaboration to have a better connection with each other versus video conferencing. We've explored using the technology for telling stories with data. So how do you use the canvas all around you to bring in what data is trying to tell you, to try and analyze that, to manipulate it naturally with your hands, with your eyes, with your voice, together with others who may be in completely different parts of the world. Spatial computing enables all of those different use cases there. But, Alex, to answer the question, spatial computing, is it the final storytelling medium? I think from our discussion, the conclusion is no. The brain is the final storytelling medium, because ultimately that is where everything gets conjured up at the end of the day, whether it's through spatial computing technology, desktop computers, video games, movies, books, cinema, theater. It is ultimately our wonderful human brain that is our final storytelling medium.
The ultimate storytelling machine.
Exactly. So thank you all for joining us on this episode. It has been a real pleasure chatting with you all. Have really enjoyed all the comments, talking to you. Let's absolutely keep the conversation going. Alex and I will try and go through all your comments and chat to you after this. And our next tech talk, we're finalizing it right now, but we're aiming to get that advertised for you in the next day or two. So hopefully you'll see some news on LinkedIn. Follow Alex, follow me, and you'll definitely see what's happening in the world of PwC Tech Talks. Thank you all for joining. See you next time.
Everyone. Bye for now.